So, a supporter of mine sent me a video from a feminist woman on TikTok. Her name is Joy, and she said that my content is an alt-right pipeline. And she also blamed my content for Onyeka getting scammed by the Danish deception. So, I'm going to react to her TikTok videos. But before I get into it, just an FYI, I am doing weekly content for Neptunian members and patrons where I give my opinions and strategies based on trending topics. So, if you are interested in my exclusive videos, the links to join are in the description box. Also, if you enjoy my content, be sure to like this video, share, and subscribe. Now, let's get into Joy's first video.
Another pipeline to the right within Black women's content is Chrissie. This is a creator who makes a lot of anti-colorism content, but sneaks in a lot of contempt for Black men, specifically Black men who are not socioeconomically privileged. This foments a lot of classist sentiments, which pairs nicely with her hypergamy takes. Here's the thing, often you'll find that her hypergamy takes are about how white men are able to provide certain things that many Black men are incapable of providing. This person talks about Black men the way white men talk about Black men.
So right off top, you can tell that Joy's primary concern is Black men and how Black men specifically are being discussed on my channel. And I did scan her TikTok page. I watched some of her videos. And like most Black feminists, she doesn't appear to genuinely be concerned about the well-being of Black women like she's concerned about Black men, because although she is anti-patriarchy, I don't see her talking about the rabid misogynoir and colorism that we as Black women, and especially dark-skinned women, experience with Black men, and how that actually leads to the existence of spaces like mine. Now, I didn't look at all of her content, but I did scroll pretty far down, and from what I observed, she talks more about patriarchy and other oppressive systems from a general standpoint. But I don't really see her addressing any of the individual Black male content creators that are perpetuating those same systems and also harming Black women, and who talk about Black women the way that racist white people talk about Black women. But she does address me and other Black woman content creators directly, and white men as well. And so that tells me that she's not necessarily scared of men and their response. I just think she's more concerned with defending and protecting Black men than she is herself and other Black women. I also find it interesting that Black feminists like Joy say that hypergamy spaces are classist, but they almost always have degrees from classist universities and PWIs. So basically, it's okay for them to use classist and or racist institutions that are tied to oppressive systems to get ahead in life. But it's wrong for other Black women to use patriarchy or hypergamy and other systems to our advantage, or date white men with more privilege or men with a higher socioeconomic status to live more comfortably. When you think about it, what women like Joy are saying is, I'm allowed to use white men and their system and their racist institutions to level up my life, but Black women, you can't actually date white men for similar purposes. And of course, the argument to that will be, oh, well, we have to participate in capitalism. We have to go to college. No, you actually don't. You could live off the grid or attempt to if you are really about that life, but you choose to opt in the system so that you can make more money and live comfortably and also get the social benefits that come with having a degree or degrees. And that is classist. Women like Joy choose to participate in the system to get ahead, and that's no different from what the hypergamy girls are doing. So let's just call a thing a thing. Let's continue.
When these creators are telling you to divest, they're literally saying, yes, whiteness is superior. I don't care that they also make anti-colorism content. That is merely self-preservation content for the people that their content is aimed towards, Black women, many of whom are oppressed by colorism. But ultimately, their politic is about marrying into whiteness and marrying into white spaces and being hypergamous to escape Blackistan.
Joy is just lying here, because I support hypergamy for Black women with all races of men. That is well known. Now, obviously, I do encourage swirling so that Black women have more options to choose from. But the way Black people keep pushing this lie about me saying that white men are superior, all because they personally have an issue with white men, is ridiculous. I did an entire interview with a white man where we both stressed the importance of not worshiping white men. I constantly encourage Black women to vet all races of men. I honestly say that more than I should. And to Joy's point about my content being self-preservation content for dark-skinned women, yes, it is. You're absolutely correct, and I've been very honest about that, because I am a dark-skinned woman who is self-first. And it's interesting because every other group, every marginalized group that Joy advocates for is also self-first on their platforms and in their spaces. This includes Black men, trans women, etc. And they consistently center themselves and their plights first, many times at the expense of Black women. I've highlighted several examples of that on my channel throughout the years. Yet Joy is expecting me and other dark-skinned women to do the exact opposite and center everyone else's plight before centering ours. And this is personally why I believe her message at its core is really just the typical anti-Black woman, misogynistic, colorist propaganda that encourages Black women to be mules, workhorses, and sacrificial lambs for Black men who hate Black women, for the Black community as a whole, and for other communities as well. And that's why it's ironic that she claims to be against white supremacy, because she's simultaneously mammifying Black women, similar to how racist white people have historically done. But in this case, it's mamming for Black men and other marginalized groups. Let's continue.
A lot of these creators are also never anti-capitalist. They're usually in the center. Like Chrissie calls herself a moderate. So she fully believes in capitalism, yet simultaneously talks about Black men being ray-rays and pookies. Like she literally calls them these words. If you are so concerned about Black men's inability to provide, why aren't you an anti-capitalist? It is capitalism that creates these conditions. It is capitalism that has had Black people enslaved and colonized. Imperialism is the highest form of capitalism. What is slavery but trying to get your production costs as low as possible, those costs being labor? Black people were the capital. So for Black people to then be capitalists themselves and talk about ray-rays and pookies and denigrate Black people while they so deeply support the very systems that produce the so-called ray-rays and pookies is weird. It's unprincipled, and that's how you know it's an alt-right pipeline.
So who was the capital when Black men were participating in selling their own people into slavery? Have we forgotten that in several regions of West Africa, there were African rulers who participated in the capture and sale of other Africans to Europeans? Now, I'm not totally equalizing that to what white men have done, but if we're going to talk about European slavery and capitalism and hierarchy, we have to acknowledge that some indigenous African societies had their own form of hierarchies and capitalist-like activities, and even patriarchy. And this was prior to colonialism. And I talked about this in my video titled Black Femininity is Eurocentric, where I was once again addressing the Black feminists who were coming against my femininity content and accusing it of being Eurocentric. And make sure you watch that video after this one if you haven't already. But something that a lot of Black feminists like to do is pretend that white men created patriarchy and created hierarchy and colorism and all the other isms that exist today when they existed in certain parts of Africa before any European influence. Africa was not just one big happy family. There was infighting, tribe against tribe. There were hierarchies. There were ranks. Not everybody was a king or a queen. And even though historically many African societies were egalitarian, there were also gender roles as well. And men did a lot of the hunting and physical labor while women cared for the children. Not all African women were female warriors. And we actually saw that in the movie The Woman King. And even with that, we saw that there was still a form of patriarchy as well. And I say all that to say that Black men are not morally superior to white men. It's just that white men had more effective strategies to enslave and conquer other people and stay in power. And what Black feminists like Joy like to do is give them a pass or make them morally superior or better than because they lost the race war. No, they just lost. And that doesn't make them any more righteous than any other group of men. If they would have won, it would be them creating white pookies and ray-rays in their Black capitalist system. And it's very interesting how she's coming down on me for being a capitalist and denigrating pookies and ray-rays when most of the pookies and ray-rays are also capitalists. They're also patriarchal, yet Joy is putting most of the responsibility to dismantle those systems or reject those systems on Black women, while making Black men merely victims of those systems when they participate in and perpetuate them just like white men. And like I said earlier, they were doing this before any European influence. So like most men, it's just in them to be patriarchal to some extent. And I'm quite sure Joy is knowledgeable enough to understand this. So in my opinion, Joy is not as anti-patriarchy as she claims to be, because if she was, she would be criticizing patriarchal Black men just as harshly as she does Black women and white men, and directing most of her ire to the gender that actually keeps patriarchy alive more than Black women, which by default is men, and that includes Black men. And she would be talking more about that instead of infantilizing Black men because they are Black. But Joy won't do that because deep down, she likely knows who Black men are. And she knows that they are not going to change, and she knows she has a higher chance of convincing Black women to opt out of participating in the system because we're easier to convince and manipulate. I think she knows that Black men are not going to change. And that to me makes these videos even more deceptive and insidious because she's holding Black women to a standard that she knows Black men will never reach while simultaneously suggesting that they are the better option when they too are patriarchal, destructive, immoral, and everything else that she's complaining that white men are. Because again, Black men are men too. She's basically just trying to convince us to ignore it and pretend that they're better and safer than white men because they were conquered and have less power. But statistically, we can see that isn't true if we look at the abuse and the femicide numbers. And that's on top of the misogynoir and colorism that we endure from them on a regular basis. That most of them are not making an effort to change, by the way. And no, Joy, they don't need all oppressive and racist systems to be dismantled to stop their abuse and bad behavior. They're not children. They know the difference between right and wrong, just like Black women do. And you talk to Black women like we should be above the system. So you need to talk to Black men the same way. Stop treating them like kids and hold them accountable the same way you hold Black women accountable who live under the same oppressive systems. Let's continue.
This hypergamy content that shifts or pushes Black women towards white men also does the bidding of the ruling class, because a lot of the white men that are hailed within these spaces are white men who are in things like private equity, literally the people who are destroying society. Their private equity firms are buying up clinics, creating shortcuts that end up killing patients, but that's the ideal partner? Okay.
So white men in the ruling class are not great partners because they are destroying society. But Black men who are abusing and unaliving Black women at 3 times the rate and also highly colorist and misogynistic towards Black women are good partners, because that is who this woman is defending. And I guarantee her response is going to be, oh, well, those men don't know any better because white men made them do it. According to most Black feminists like Joy, anything that white men do is wrong because they're inherently evil. But anything Black men do wrong is because they're poor, innocent victims of the system and they have no agency and they are being controlled by white men. So again, she's infantilizing Black men and saying that they're little children and have no agency and expect Black women to just tolerate them because they're oppressed. Or I guess she just wants us to be single because dating out isn't an option. That's basically what she's saying without saying it. But sorry, Joy, that is not realistic. Some of us are going to date and marry out, and you're just going to have to deal with that. Let's move on to Joy's other video where she mentioned me.
Being scammed by a Danish white man who claims to be a royal is one of the most natural consequences of femininity and hypergamy content. Y'all know I hate hypergamy content and femininity content because it leaves women vulnerable to being taken advantage of, because what they're actually selling you is a combination of SW work that you're not equipped to actually navigate, combined with white supremacy, a boatload of patriarchy that you can internalize and craft yourself into being the ideal woman. And the ideal man that you're building all of this for is a white man, because those pieces are also notoriously anti-Black. That goes from everybody from Sheer 7 to Chrissie, all of them. They all peddle in the same thing, that you can live your princess life with a white man. So when a Danish man comes up to you and says, I'm royal and I have all this money, you are already primed to be susceptible to that. And I bet a lot of these love scammers are on the internet looking and watching at what rhetoric is being passed around amongst these pink pill groups and taking advantage.
So this is exactly what I said would happen in my video review about Onyeka and the Danish deception. All of the anti-swirl pro-Black people are going to try to connect me to Onyeka and blame hypergamy content as a whole for why she got scammed. I knew this would happen. And by the way, watch my live stream on the Danish deception if you haven't already. But what's interesting about this is Joy is doing the opposite of what she claims me and the hypergamy girls are doing. She's hiding Black men's behavior behind white supremacy. She's making them righteous by default. And in so many words, she is suggesting that they are the better option simply because they're Black. And pushing that narrative is actually what primes Black women to be taken advantage of by the worst Black men. And that's something we see far more often than what happened to Onyeka. But of course, women like Joy will never acknowledge that because, again, this is not about protecting Black women, it's about protecting Black men. And Joy, I'm only going to speak for myself and my content specifically, but you are flat out lying on my content. You can't say in one breath that I preach hypergamy and encourage Black women not to date and marry down, and then say that my content in particular encourages women like Onyeka to get scammed by white men and trick on them. Tricking on men is quite literally the antithesis of hypergamy. So there's no way my content would lead to what Onyeka went through based on that alone, especially when I've told Black women specifically to vet all races of men. I've also denounced S-work on my channel repeatedly, and I specifically said that I would never convince women to be S-workers because it's dangerous, and especially dangerous for Black women. So Joy lumping associating my content with women who promote S work directly or indirectly is dishonest. And also, my femininity and hypergamy content was never centered around men or specifically created to help Black women improve for men. And anyone who has the series or heard the series can attest to that. But see, Joy intentionally skipped over all that and all of my content that debunks what she's saying because she's Black male identified and she's triggered by Black women who are romantically involved with white men. That is what this is really about. And she's flat out being dishonest because her objective is to protect Black men like most Black feminists do. And the way she is exaggerating, it reminds me of how people always say that I tell Black women to only date millionaires, but they can never produce any actual video of me saying that after a decade of being online. But they tell that lie because they have to make me sound extreme to discredit me to their audience. If they repeat my real talking points or the real advice I give Black women, then their audience would be like, okay, what's wrong with that? So they have to exaggerate to make me sound worse than what I am. And that's why, to me, videos like this are made in bad faith. And these women know what they're doing. They understand nuance. They know the difference between my content and Shira Seven's content. They know it's not the same. That's why I'm rarely ever included in the conversation when people talk about Shira. And I do get that some of our content overlaps, but my content also overlaps with feminism as well. And it's like, depending on what narrative these people are trying to paint, I'm either a man-hating feminist or I'm a white male worshiper. And I just feel like these people are lying to discredit me. That's really all this is. And when it comes to the S work comparison specifically, prioritizing hypergamy is not the same as a strictly transactional relationship. And you know that, Joy. So let's just stop with the exaggerations. Also, Joy, if you're saying that my content specifically has led to Black women getting scammed by white men, you're going to need to show proof to back up your claim that my content has led Black women to that outcome over the course of a decade. And that goes for anyone else claiming that my content specifically has caused Black women to get scammed or unalived by white men. I'm gonna need the receipts. Because surely after 10 years of Chrissie content, you should have multiple examples to back up your claim. And I say that because there are tons of evidence that connects red pill content to the radicalization of young men. There's actual evidence of some of the men who follow the manosphere and the passport bros causing harm in the real world. And I'm not saying that no hypergamy and femininity content can potentially lead to dangerous outcomes, because I have warned women about the extremes in both movements over the years. And I'm sure Joy has heard me do that, and everyone else has too. She's just pretending like she didn't hear it. So I'm going to need Joy and everyone else to show proof of how my content specifically is encouraging Black women to get scammed out of thousands of dollars by white men, when I have vehemently told women to not give money to any race of men for 10 years, when I've also told them not to manstroke any race of men for the last 10 years. If my content that has existed for well over 10 years led Black women to the alt-right or led to the general radicalization of Black women, there should be some actual proof of that. Not just one random Black woman on TikTok who you have absolutely no proof even knows who I am or listens to my content. You can't just make up baseless claims and serious accusations like that with no proof to back it up. I don't take these false claims lightly, especially when they're getting thousands and thousands of views on TikTok. And I find her commentary highly offensive, considering that I've gone out of my way to separate myself from the extreme BWE or Black women's empowerment, divestment. I have literally been in back and forth with the extreme side of the divestment movement for years, telling them that their worship of white men is problematic. And Joy is acting like she didn't see that and creating a false narrative about me to thousands of people. No, I'm not going to stand for that. And the record also shows that I've addressed the extreme side of the femininity movement, the swirl movement, and all the rest. So again, if you're going to make these claims about my channel and my content, you need to back it up with some receipts. I need to see them, because this is ridiculous. And for those of you who always ask me why I put most of my femininity and hypergamy content behind a paywall and only made it available for a limited time, this is why. It's the intentional lying and hysteria surrounding hypergamy and femininity content for Black women. This kind of intentional misconstruing of my content when I've been very thorough and nuanced is why I made my content private. Not because I changed my mind and I no longer believe in what I said, but because of shit like this. And some would say, oh, well, why not keep the videos public so people can hear the truth for themselves? Well, because when it was public, people were doing the same exact thing that Joy was doing, and even worse. They were spreading lies about my content despite the proof being right on my channel. And even with the videos that are down, I still have videos that are public proving that everything Joy is saying about me are either lies or exaggerations. But just like back in the day, people are going to blindly believe her without checking the source, or because they're extreme in their minds, or because they lack nuance and basic comprehension skills, they're making my content out to be something that it's not. And I'm sorry, but your stupidity is not my problem. And you cherry picking certain information from my content and ignoring the rest, or over radicalizing my content because you're radical and you think in extremes, that is not my problem. And that's what people were doing when my femininity videos were still up. Or they were looking at the titles or the thumbnails and just basing their opinions on that. And I'm sorry, but I just couldn't keep dealing with that. I could not keep dealing with Black women like Joy making my femininity content out to be something that it wasn't, because they didn't have the range or were too Black male identified to comprehend it properly. And for those of you who are begging me to come back to TikTok, people like Joy and videos like this are why I refuse to come back to that platform. Because I simply cannot deal with this level of dishonesty, exaggeration, and concern trolling of Black women and hypergamy content or any other level up content for Black women. I am just not willing to subject myself to more of that on another platform, especially not for the pennies TikTok is paying. I already get enough of that on YouTube, but it's more worth it on YouTube because at least they pay well. Now, if things change on TikTok, I may change my mind and go back over there in the future, but as of now, it's a no for me. So anyway, if you have any other TikTok clips you would like me to react to, especially from TikTokers who mention me specifically, please send them to askchrissie@gmail.com. Also, let me know what you think about this video in the comments, and I'll catch up with you in the next one.